So here is our Decastar welder that we have here in the auto shop. It's not the best quality unit, but it does the trick for now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about exhaust welding as one of the common tasks that happens in the shop all the time. But before you're able to get in there and weld the exhaust pipe, you got to know a bit about welder setup, and of course you always got to take safety into consideration. So first things first, remember to have your arms covered. You need to be wearing a good set of leather gloves, okay? They should be around the machine. We also have our welding helmets here. This is an auto dimmer that stays with the welder. On the inside of the helmet, it should be set to a number 10 in terms of our lens shade. And also, it's a good idea to push this little on button that you'll see in there to reset the screen. Another thing, make sure that you have a good set of shoes on, because you often will get sparks that can go down and land on your feet, and if you don't have closed-toed shoes or a good shoe tongue, it can melt through and burn your foot. Also, make sure you have your safety glasses on inside your welding helmet. Is always a good idea. So a few basic features of the machine that you need to know is that we have our torch here. This is our torch, or else our feed or gun, whatever you want to call it. Many people call it different things. Out of the end of this gun comes the wire. This is a MIG welder, so it actually feeds a wire into the weld puddle to add filler metal to build the weld up. We also, of course, have our plug-in that comes out of the front of the machine. And to weld, we need to create a complete circuit, so we have a ground clamp. The ground clamp must always be connected to your workpiece that you're welding to make a nice continuous circuit. And, like I'll mention later, you need to make sure you have good connection. So you must have this clamped onto a nice shiny piece of metal. So you grind a little spot to make sure that you have a good connection, because you can't have a good weld without a good connection. Okay. Next is that this welder uses a gas to shield the weld so that we get a nice quality weld and we don't get any oxidation. On the back of the machine here, you'll see that we have a tank of blue shield, so it's an argon and carbon dioxide mixture. It's got a preset regulator, so all you have to do is make sure you turn on that bottle before you start welding to make sure that you have an adequate flow of gases to shield your weld. So here's the controls of our welder. So a few things you have to be aware of. This, unlike other welders, typically have one dial to control your temperature, so your current range that you have to weld at. That's your heat typically. And then it does have a dial right here that controls your wire feed. Okay? So the first things to note is your on-off switch on the right-hand side has to be on, of course, to do its welding. Okay? And then you have 4 settings that are going to determine your heat here. So you have low, 1, 2, and then you have high, 1 and 2. Okay? So of course low 1 and 1 is the coldest weld, low 2 is a step up, high 1, and then high 2. So you can choose between those 4 settings, and those kind of develop a baseline. They do depend on the thickness of the metal and your welding style, but typically, for what we're going to be doing, I know that I'm going to start off on a low 2 today. Also, wire speed, I'm going to be starting off at about a 6, and I know this from experience. However, new welders might have to do a couple trials to see if they're getting too much heat. That means like melting through the metal, or the weld bead kind of lays flat, or else maybe the weld bead's too high and bubbly. You got to be aware of those things. Okay, so you got to set your machine up first, and then you got to turn on your gas, and of course making sure you have good connections. So therefore a good ground clamp on a nice shiny piece of bare metal that's going to be continuing that loop that you need to get a good arc and weld puddle. Okay, so here you can see that I've got my piece of exhaust pipe set up in the vise, so it's held securely. I have my ground clamp on an outer edge, which is actually touching shiny metal. Okay, as you can see, there's rusty metal around here. You want to make sure you always see that shine of the metallic color to make sure you're getting a good connection. I've got that. And the weld I'm going to be doing is what we call a butt weld, where you're welding each end of the pipe to just flush up. You can also do a lap weld, which is more common, which is simply going to mean that we would simply have two pieces of pipe overlapping and weld the seam of them together. So I've got my gas on, my welder set up, and I've turned my machine on. And now a good thing to do if you want to check your weld before you do it is you're going to just do a quick little sample bead. So you'll just put a little tack weld on it. So to get a good weld, you want to hold your nozzle about a nice steady distance from the metal. Hold your hand still, and you're just going to simply pull your trigger and take a look at the weld pattern after you do it, and you can analyze it. Okay. So if I take a look at that weld, I can kind of see that I'm pretty much where I want to be. It's a little bit flat for my liking, so I'm going to turn up my wire speed a little bit. I know I need a bit of a higher feed rate. And when you weld, you want to listen for a very continuous sound, almost like a high speed, almost kind of like a crackle slash sizzle. And if you keep that sound consistent, it often indicates that you're going to have a nice consistent weld. But again, that comes with experience. Okay, so one technique for butt welding exhaust pipe is to tack weld it, of course, before you do anything. I kind of have it clamped here in a vise, but it's always a good idea just to put a couple tack welds to make sure that you hold your piece still before you start running a continuous bead around them. So I'm just going to place two tack welds about 90 degrees apart in terms of the radius of the pipe. So here we go. Okay, so I'm definitely a little hot, so I'm going to have to probably move a little bit quicker now when I weld. So that's one tack weld. As you can see, I focused and you can see that melt through. I'll be able to take care of that with my welding technique here in a minute. I'm going to put one more tack back on this side. Okay, so now I have two tacks, and I would do that all the way around. And now my next thing is I'm going to try and fill that gap. This is a bit wide of a gap. I would suggest trying to make your pipe as tight as you can possibly get it. Okay, so now I've rotated my pipe, and I'm going to just move on, keeping that bead consistent down this seam. So I've had to adjust my welder settings a bit after I've welded, and just avoiding any burn through. So there's my tack weld. So I'm going to just continue that bead down here, probably about an inch. Okay. You can weld in increments in thin metal like this, which will help too much heat concentration from melting the metal right away. So here we go. Okay, now that I see the metal cool a bit, you can see that my bead is a fairly consistent width. A bit of an angle there just because I'm kind of welding on an awkward angle, the camera in my way. But the bead width is nice, it's laying nice and flat. So I'll continue that on another inch, and you'll see that it's not melting through, and it's making a nice sealed exhaust seam. So now you can see there's a nice, there's a bit of an overlapping puddle pattern that lets you know, kind of indicates that my welding style, but also lets you know that that bead is a nice continuous puddle of metal the whole way. So here you can see the area that I've welded. It's not my greatest work of art, but it is consistent. You can see that it's a fairly consistent width on each side. It hasn't been melting through. There's no bubbles or pits. But as you can see, it's nice sealed weld and consistent. And I just have to keep going around the whole pipe like that. If I was working under a vehicle, of course, I could keep going in a continuous speed for probably about 180 degrees of the pipe before I'd have to adjust my position to continue the weld. And do that the whole way. Make sure your exhaust is sealed and you're good to go. Then you, of course, shut down your welder and make sure that your gas is off.